Our first conversation this morning is In Search of Poetry Today, and I'm happy to introduce, speaking on this subject, Toi Derricotte, Anne Waldman, and C.D. Wright.
Good morning. So nice to see all of you and to welcome you again to our Poets Forum, our first conversation of the morning. And I'm Anne Waldman. This is C.D. Wright. This is Toi Derricotte. We're really happy to be here, I think, even though it's a little early. But we're so pleased you're here. And we're going to address a little bit just some responses to the notion of blending of genres and this idea of the dissolution of genres. Maybe we don't all agree with that necessarily. Poetry is many things. I think we've all worked in a number of ways ourselves personally as poets in terms of these descriptions. The bomb shelter, the tenant farmer of poetry, exclusive zone of poetry, etc. These are, things floating in our kind of always unsettled, let's say, it's the restless desk. So I call whatever I read these days in this sort of format, feminifestos, kind of statements of where I think things are at, but it's always changing. So I'll start, and then I think we're going to Toi, and then to CD. Search of Poetry Today, the dissolution of genres, and it was that in search of that got me off initially on this little track. Actually, poetry is coming at me all the time. So it's not so much a search for it, but a current, active, perpetual arrival of it. An archive amassing on shelves and in my mind with arrows of it, chariots of it, reams of it, and imprints arriving on the screen as well, arriving in myriad forms, in various tomes and volumes of all shape and size, and magazines and recordings and virtual online interactive iterations of it. The genres are multiple. The blending and blurrings of the hybrid are upon us. Dissolution? No. Adventures in new invention. The technology changes, the set changes. It's interesting to have one's lifespan witness many leaps in poetry's long stretch, its long arc, its long mappings. As long as we speak, as long as we have our larynx, we find these forms. Poetry's existed since the time of the human. I mean, we just go back. We're commensurate. We're right there. We're adjacent to. We're there with the whole human plan. We'll see where it's going to go. Poetry goes with the human wherever the human goes. This, as I've said in this kind of forum before, is inspiring incredible amount of activity and passion and bustle of our very active poetry worlds, witnessed, as many of you would know, at these huge conferences with the AWP, with events such as this forum, programs like Dodge. But in any case, it confirms to me that there's this range and there's this extraordinary interest and curiosity, and this is a kind of active time for poetry. Not that it is always good, great, genius, powerful, relevant all the time, and there are controversies as ever in the long lineage of word workers about what might and might not be allowed and might be considered poetry even. I mean, how do we define something like conceptual poetry? I'm not going to go there, as they say, but this is a kind of burning question, and issues of appropriation, issues of how we do our investigative poets, our documentary poets. But this passion, this care, often invoking a kind of polemic warfare, feels it's a challenge, and it's also a good sign that there are people worrying the question. And then, I try to see it as healthy. I mean, even if you're not always on the same page, poetry has been called elitist, as it should be at times. I think the times are changing. I'm very impressed with the dynamic that we've felt these couple of days. I think the range that we have in our Board of Chancellors, the incredible work that people are doing that is in discourse with one another. It's also very different. I think we all represent or come from different kinds of lineages and backgrounds and communities to some extent, but there are these wonderful overlaps and deep respect, I think, for what people are doing. And I like to invoke the notion of infrastructure as well as, being in the world as a poet, being in the world in a way that your work can come into public space, can come into forums such as this, and that people aren't just worrying their own careers, so to speak, or their own, you're worrying the poem all the time, and yet the way that we behave, our ethos in the world is so important as ambassadors for poetry, as makers, as people who want to be in conversation. We thrive on the conversation. We thrive on the communication, on the collaboration, on the translation, on the exchange. So there's this wonderful variety of voices available from many diverse communities, and our social networks enable us to be in touch with poets all over the world. That can be a curse as well. Poetry can't just live by the social media and the whims and qualms and so on. But this notion of discourse, being in conversation, I so much feel that my work is in conversation with others. I'm still hearing voices of other in my head, poems that were written hundreds of years ago in some cases. So we talk about, rewards and goals. How can what it is we even do be measured? And that's what I enjoy about this whole field of operation, that it's not measured in those ways. This notion of careerism, that you can somehow come to a point where, what am I going to do with my life? Let's see, there are all these choices, let's pick poetry. It doesn't quite work that way. It chooses you, I think. And then, one is working out of this passion, this curiosity. You want to know everything you can about poetry. You're looking into the past, you're looking into the future, you're thinking about the slime molds who will inherit the earth and what their poetics will be like. I've been fantasizing about the sounds of the slime molds as they communicate their new poetics and poetry. Slurp. There's a very good documentary of late on slime molds. I'm very fascinated with a being that's not animal, not vegetable, has no organs, no brain, and yet can make decisions. So sometimes I'd like to think that would be a great state, none of these other things, but at least to make decisions. Should I put a semicolon there? Should I dash? Should I drop a line? Anyway, don't get me started on slime molds. I'm telling you, it's the future. So I do think that poetry still in these times, these very, very dark times, I think I'm very challenged by Giorgio Agamben, the extraordinary Italian philosopher's question is, what is it to be contemporary with one's time? And his view is that you must look, and he talks about poets specifically, poets have to look at the darkness of their time, to look into the darkness of our time. How is one contemporary? One looks into the darkness of our time. And you do that through your negative capability, through your way of being able to hold and live with the contradictions, to take your seat with the contradictions and be open and available to, not just what you know and what you know of the past and what you've relied on and the kinds of, forms or traditions or what makes you feel most secure, but to venture out as well. And he talks about the notion of these dark cells in our retinas, and that there's actually a kind of vision in the darkness, a kind of vision in seeing into the darkness that's not paralyzing. And we have to always remember that, light is coming at us, hasn't always arrived yet. Things have already happened, but they haven't yet arrived. As we investigate our the worlds outside our own temporality. There's, so much going on, with the recent neutrino discourse that maybe some of you have followed. So I think for these times, for me, one of the things that's it's not dissolution, but it's actually a kind of building, an intelligence, is take this interest in these new vocabularies, in these new ways of seeing, and the sense of dimensionality of investigative and documentary work into these other things we don't know so much about. So there's, a lot of people are doing a lot of work, especially inspired by our ecological issues on, endangered species, endangered languages, all kinds of endangered things, and that we find vocabularies and rhythms and ways of becoming some of these things we're so concerned about. So that's important to me in what I'm seeing of the new work, and I think there is it's not so much a dissolution, but a rendering to this time and this looking into the darkness. So also how it's so important, the consciousness of the so-called poetry tribe, which is why I'm so thrilled with the community here, that everybody seems so conscious and awake. And when we founded the Kerouac School, we talked about, our slogan was, poetry exists to help wake the world up to itself. So that was so important. I think a lot of these new paths that people are finding is helping that project. So this idea of other cultures that are endangered, languages, experiences, our whole sense of our psyche as humans at this time. And also paying attention to our dreams, our nightmares, and because this is such a devastating scenario for humans, I mean, just the range of violence, as we all know, is just unsurpassed, I think, certainly in my lifetime, in terms of what I had expected, especially after World War II, some kind of accounting there. But anyway, this is the Anthropocene. I think most of you know that word, anthropos, man. It's the time, we've been, shifted from the Holocene, the Anthropocene, where nothing is not controlled or interfered with or meddled with without the hand of man. And we have the pulse of the hive, as I mentioned, social media, the sense of, instead of using this social media and Indra's net and so on, it's the hive buzzing,
Mm-hmm.
Just that little buzz of your little hand device. Poets create environments still of mind and spirit. And on these things that are used, that are the techne, that are the skillful means, perhaps, for some of the work we do, on Facebook and Twitter and Tumblr and so on. There are possibilities there. And then there are, the videos that people are making, the performances, the CDs, the movies, the libretti, and then there's the live, brilliant, shimmering, sometimes raging performance in so many venues all across the land. It's in our politics, a call for that, I think. So I feel more like, this idea of seeking, searching, the title of this panel. I'm like a magnet. I think we all feel that as poets. We're like magnets for poetry. Hybrids, mutants, monsters, angels is also coming in dreams, inflecting and infecting the frequency for all of us who dwell in the rhizomes of poetry, that interconnected tuber system, fascinating tangle of language and logopoeia. Just a few quotes from American Hybrid, the Norton Anthology that came out in 2009, and attempts to manifest and evidence changes and possibilities for poetry in the past 20 years. It's no longer between the two camps of official verse culture, more subject matter content poetry, initially left-hand margin-centric and experimental, but current practices engage the experimental and the traditional and the wild. I also wanted to reference this new anthology Jerry Rothenberg and a co-editor, Barbaric, Vast, and Wild, which is kind of more like outsider poetry. So I think within the dynamics that we have currently available to us, there's still so much that hasn't been claimed yet, that needs to be refreshed, that needs to be seen and viewed. We don't have to just, conquer tear up the land and move on to the next thing. So I'm being a little more conservative here about this topic. So mentioning that, in an interview with about this book, there's difficulty in defining the hybrid poem. It's not a single thing. It's a rich tendency in contemporary letters that draws its influences and impulse from all extremes and from everything in between. There's an errance that explodes the narrow linear path into an open field. Far from being homogeneous, Cole Swenson, one of the editors, speaks of it being feline. Trying to categorize would be like the futile attempt to herd cats. So there's lacks in this book. I mean, it's been criticized for not being more diverse, but I think it is a little bit of an intervention, and a cultural intervention, and something to build on. But speaking of the aesthetics of the page, it's vigorous, it's careful and precise, inventive yet scholarly, demanding yet dignified, and there's a notion from this particular point of view that anything that's not experimental is more hollow, like a husk. But there's a huge range of people, in spite of some questions, which includes C.D. and Jory Graham and Leslie Scalapino, Claudia Rankin, and a host of others. But I welcome the idea of shifting definitions, of breaking down some of the theistic prosody approaches and rules which posits poems as simply content. I question William Carlos Williams's old adage of poems as perfectly ordered machines, as perfectly ordered in their parts, nothing unnecessary, nothing extraneous. That was the machine age, the visible machination of industry and commerce. Now we are in a different kind of commerce. And we are inside this minutia in a way. I think as I was raising this notion of the science and the slime molds, we can get inside some of these other kinds of forms that sort of mirror patterns, have this kind of patterning in our own experience. So we're looking at neuroscience, we were considering the intelligence of other planets, other plants, animal intelligence, the cortisorial map, the way whole groves of trees communicate. We talk about quantum physics and entanglement, the relationship of the spider in its web, that perfectly designed relationship accommodating the dimensions of the spider's body. We have, many of us are getting inside some of these kinds of life forms. There's a list for this categories that I think are in the description. The bomb shelter, perhaps. Often that's an image for me, having grown up at a time where we did take refuge with our little dog tags that were, how are these going? That was my, first sense of cognitive dissonance. How is this dog tag going to save me or even exist after some sort of nuclear attack? But we mentioned in this thing the bomb shelter of poetry, and I've been thinking of the Book of Thel, Blake's Book of Thel, where Thel comes to the womb and to consciousness of the world, and is she going to come into the world? And she's shown her own grave plot, and I see that grave plot as a kind of bomb shelter. So my advice in the poem is, I don't know if you want to come here. I don't know if you want to come here. So smoke screens, masked identities, lawless enemy, something that doesn't seem to have a purpose or identity, is too wandering. But I like these new vocabularies that science affords. I welcome a kind of lack of closure or knowing it all. There's so much going on in the small press and collective worlds. Again, look to collaboration. There's wonderful projects at CUNY, the Lost and Found series, which is actually reclaiming hidden and disappeared texts. There's great translation work going on with Ugly Duckling, Nightboat, and I wanted to just reference for a moment Claudia Rankin's Citizen, which I think many of you have know somewhat this book, and she's been reading from it around. It's just received incredible praise and awards, which is a lyric threaded collection of prose poems that really cut to the quick of racism in this country, and nothing we've seen before of this kind. And it's subtitled An American Lyric, which gives you pause when you're thinking about that particular genre. It's a very arresting lyric, and lyric poetry, traditionally a form of poetry which expresses personal emotions or feelings, typically spoken in the first person. This goes way beyond that. And I had just a few quotes. In Citizen, ranking turns lyric on its side. The form is prose, but it's, in this book, that content is, it's prose poetry, seething off the page. It's also telling story, telling anecdote. Is it essay, polemic, memoir? It is, in a sense, a heightened exegesis, which is very astute in its threadings. Personal, yes, and universal. That's what makes it so emotive, so lyric. It took centuries, though, for a book like this to manifest and rock into our time, this difficult moment of even more these exposures of insidious racism that we're dealing with, that we all have to confront. Just a few titles for parts of it. There's a script for situation video Hurricane Katrina. That in itself is a new kind, a blending of a new kind of form or category. The script for situation video in memory of Trayvon Martin, 2012. Stop and Frisk situation video created with John Lucas. Working with the culture, working in collaboration, working with these other forms, and yet able to have a book which is not just a script for these texts. So she's taking on both the macro and micro aggressions of contemporary reality. And just a few quotes. Because of your elite status from a year's worth of travel, you have already settled into your window seat on United Airlines. When the girl and her others arrive at your row, the girl looking over at you tells her mother, "These are our seats, but this is not what I expected." The mother's response is barely audible. "I see," she says, "I'll sit in the middle." Another example, when you arrive in your doorway and turn off the car, you remain behind the wheel another 10 minutes. You fear the night is being locked in and coded on a cellular level and want time to function as a power wash. Sitting there, staring at the closed garage door, you're reminded that a friend once told you there exists the medical term John Henryism for people exposed to stresses stemming from racism. They achieved this to death trying to lodge the buildup of erasure. Sherman James, the researcher who came up with this term, claimed this physiological costs were high. You hope by sitting in silence you are bucking the trend. There's a lot impact, and that's the idea of the prose poem. Things have become very impacted, very, there's a need to want to take this apart. Look at, it's investigative. It's a documentary kind of poetics. And there are many, many examples of wonderful people doing this kind of work. And I did want to just also reference a book called 100 Notes on Violence, written by the poet Julie Carr. Carr researches terrorism, looking everywhere from Whitman to Dickinson, and this is from a review by Library Journal, to lists of phobias and weapons store catalogs for answers. Do they lie in statistics, in statements by and about rapists and killers, in the capacity for cruelty that the poet herself admits to? This book is a dream document both of light and innocence, babies, and the urge to protect them, and of giving into a wrenching darkness where despair lies in the very fact that no single factor is to blame. And I'm going to stop there. There's much more to say on these matters, but there's something about, a new kind of consciousness, I think, responding to these, to gun violence, say, and the way poets are working with finding new forms, doing a kind of research that is both fastidious and careful and I think investigated in that people are queried. Often a polemic involves a conversation, and again, to say that we need all of you to embrace this poetry consciousness. It's as I said, goes with the description, goes with the hominid, comes with our larynx, with our wide awake minds that are operating in evidently 11 directions of space now. So we go into the 5th, 8th, 12th, 11th dimension. But just quickly, I was so moved to hear Joy Harjo here last night conjure this wonderful, some of these wonderful younger indigenous poets, Layli Long Soldier, Sherwin Bitsui, Orlando White, who are also doing the work. And I think we haven't even paid attention yet to many of the voices already in our worlds and in our realities. And I taught at the Native American school in New Mexico, where all these poets actually studied and were nourished. And I was very impressed by there was a different way of seeing and working with language. And I found, this experience of an indigenous relationship to land, the things of this land, to vocabularies where a word can move certainly in the Navajo tradition, a word can move in many directions. It changes. Okay, thank you.
Poem to my child, if ever you shall be. The way the universe sat waiting to become quietly in the nether of space and time, you too remain some cellular snuggle dangling between my legs, curled in the warm swim of my mostly quietest self. If you come to be, and who knows, I wonder, little bubble of unbudded capillaries, little one ever a swirl in my vascular galaxies, what would you think of this world that turns itself steadily into an oblivion that hurts, and hurts bad? Would you curse me, my careless caressing you into this world? Or would you rise up and mustering all your strength into that tiny throat that one day, no doubt, would grow big and strong, scream and scream and scream until you break the back of one injustice? Or at least get to your knees and kiss back to life some roadkill? I have so many questions for you are closer to me than anyone has ever been, tumbling as you are this second through my heart's every chamber, your teeny mouth singing along with the half-broke workhorse's steady boom and gasp. And since we're talking today, I should tell you, though I know you sneak a peek sometimes through your father's eyes, it's a glorious day, and there are millions of leaves collecting against the curbs, and they're the most delicate shade of gold we've ever seen and must favor the transparent wings of the angels you're swimming with, little angel. And as to your mother, well, I don't know, but my guess is that lilac bursts from her throat, and she is both honeybee and wasp, and some kind of moan to boot, and probably she dances in the morning, but who knows? You'll swim beneath that bridge if it comes. For now, let me tell you about the bush called honeysuckle, and the sad call a weed, and how you can push your little sun-licked face into the throngs and breathe and breathe. Sweetness would be your name, and you would wonder why 4 of your teeth are so sharp and the tiny mountain range of your knuckles so hard, and you would throw back your head and open your mouth at the cows lowing their human songs in the field, and the pigs swimming in shit and clover, and everything on earth, little dreamer of the new world, holy, every raindrop and sand grain and blade of grass worthy of love and love and love. Tiny shaman, little blood thrust, tiny trillion cells trilling and trilling, little dreamer, little hard hat, little heartbeat, little best of me. And that's what it looks like, right? Okay, that's Ross Gay, so it's pretty traditional in form. Okay, now this is another one, very different looking, right? Okay, this is by Giovanni Singleton, and it's from her book called Ascension, which is concrete and visual poems that go through the 43 days, I think it is, of the Bardo as a mourning honoring Alice Coltrane's passing from life, her transition. And so this is a performance score for MU, where every occurrence of MU acts as a site for improvisation on the famous Zen koan, Does a Dog Have Buddha Nature? Okay, so this is how it goes. Can you see it? Okay, it goes, moo, no, not, does a dog moo? Does a dog Moo. Does a dog have Buddha? Moo, nature. Non-being, moo. Without moo, does a dog have Buddha, nature? Study the way nature. Without moo, does a cow have Buddha, moo, nature, moo? Does a cow have Buddha nature? Moo, cow, moo. Do you? Do you moo? Do you have Buddha, moo, nature? Do you have moo? Isn't that fabulous? Okay. Now, this is by John Murillo. And so it's called Ode to the Crossfader. How many know what a crossfader is? Oh, God, come on, guys. Thank you. I didn't know either, but I thought you would know. Okay, so a crossfader is like where you have your hand on the record. I think I'm going to say this right. And you know how to lift your hand so that one sound disappears and the other gradually gets louder. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. Ode to the Crossfader. I feel like I should be standing up reading. Ode to the Crossfader. Got this mix board itch, this bass line lifted. Oh, this is how it looks. I'm sorry. Did I do that? Okay. This is how it looks. It goes in and out. See? This is the form. Okay. Got this mix board itch, this bass line lifted from my father's dusty wax. Got wax. 40 crates stacked in the back of the attic, this static in the headphones, hum in the blood, this deep bass buckshot thump in the chest. Got reasons and seasons pressed to both palms, 2 coins from each realm. This memory cross-faded and cued, these knuckles, nicks, and night sweat writes, this frantic abacus of scratch, got blood in the crates, in the chest, in the dust, feel hollers to break beats, my father's dusty wax, my father's dust, got reasons, got night sweats and hollers, pressed to both palms, break beats and hollers, pressed to both palms, static in the attic, stacked crates of memory, dust, blood, and memory, cross-faded and bass, cross-faded and cued, cross-faded and static, stacked hollers, got reasons in the dust, in the chest, got seasons in the blood, in the headphones hum, this deep bass buckshot, blood pressed to both palms, my father's dust pressed to both palms, got reasons and reasons and reasons. Okay, so time goes fast. Okay, these poems in totally different styles were all written by poets of Cave Canem. I don't know if you've ever heard of Cave Canem, but it's an organization that is a safe home for African American poets. And I may be accused of being not too objective here because I'm one of the co-founders with Cornelius Eady, but I can't resist telling you about these guys. So, and I think it's really appropriate because I'm going to talk about the Congo Square of poetry. Because don't forget, 20 years ago, all the chancellors were white men, just 20 years ago. And that was the year Cave Canem was founded. Okay, so I never read a black poet in grade school, high school, college, or grad school. I never studied with a black poet. And, you know, if you were a black poet, you were supposed to be writing about race. You know, you had a job to do. So where was it safe to do what you needed to do, to write what you needed to write, whatever it was? And so that was the idea that Cornelius and I we're thinking about all those years we were the only ones in our graduate class, in teaching in these universities. And it was always like, were we really supposed to be there? You know, was there really such a thing as black poetry? So that first night, 20 years ago, when we sat down in that circle and people looked across the room, people who had never studied with a black poet, never seen another black poet, And they saw, at that time, there were 25 fellows sitting in that circle. You can imagine, everything changed. And the thing they said is they felt safe. One black man said, crying, that was the first time in his life he had taken off his defenses. Now, Elizabeth Alexander says, the space made for the apparent differences among us, because you can hear that differences among us are what it's all about. It's not put a group of black poets in a room and they're all going to write about the same thing. It's diversity that is the fuel for innovation and excellence. It's the diversity. And Elizabeth says, the space made for the apparent differences among us made space for the differences within us. Each of us as we move through the journeys of our lives and our works. So when I was growing up, diversity was seen as a threat. It was dangerous to get too much out of the circle. But in this group of people, they see it as the opposite of a threat. It's life, it's enriching, it's as I said, fuel. Okay, there are over 400 fellows now all over the United States. Many of them have won the most prestigious awards in the country. This year, Greg Pardlow won the Pulitzer Prize. But they're all getting the top awards in the country. Okay, let me see. I got one more minute.
Go. Mine's short.
Okay, there's a lot more I could say. But I think, okay, you got to see this group of people not only as a group in and of itself. You got to see that these people see themselves against the backdrop of what couldn't exist before. So there's always that consciousness of safety. Oh, we gotta keep this, because if not, because I always thought when I first started studying poetry that literature was like everybody was loved literature and we were really lovely to each other and it was all a beautiful world. That's what I thought when I became a poet. And then it's like literature was an arm of the same brutalization that caused slavery. It was part of the same arm. We weren't just sitting around being nice to each other. A lot of it was unconscious, but it was there. So, okay, I could say so much more, but I think I should read a couple poems, right? All right. Tracy Morris, if only she was here to read it herself. This is what it looks like. What the sister, brother, mother making in the oven? Subtle shoulder bounce come-uppance? Break dance from Angolans going us up under ships rowing? Flowing over undertow, Sammy's taps, hand jive happenstance to techno trance, folks coveting color. True black being an encompassing hue, placento siphoned off magenta, violence, indigo blues with cane, cotton, tobacco, rose to hoe. So what you saying? So's a John Henry against the dopest steam engine? Recidiv, I knew I was going to trip on that. Recidivism's net effect is akin to Amadou Luima ass kicking. Hit it. Reconnoiting Negroes, AWOL versus dominating Nazi Aryans. RNA versus DNA in the body politic. Difference being the leftovers, sugar. What flies is attracted to besides shit? We got some. Circulocutus infidels affirming the feral biologic, importing it. Each territory a precious piece. Kill them with kindness. Sweet like a Lauren declaration of love overlapping the looped beta backbeat. like a 12-year-old's pressed curls greased with Dax, like somebody 57 polishing his T-bird with turtle wax. Old romance, a cara to chitlins to chicken wings, shekara to ham bone to two technics. Field holla doo-wops make microphone fiends. That's Tracy Morris's, I'm not sure. There's a wonderful anthology by Camille Dungy called Black Nature. And what it is how black poets sort of weren't in nature books because it was all about transcendentalists and all. But so what did nature mean to black poets? How did they turn that around? So this is a great anthology with wonderful poems, and that's one. So thanks so much for listening.
I just have a few notes. I think, when I was trying to think, what was I trying to say here? I think I'm coming from the perspective of a veteran teacher, and it's loosely titled The Great Array and Disarray. Homophonics, ekphrastics, erasures, in recent years have sort of been bombarded with these poems by students. And I can think of very fine examples like Don Miché's The Morning News is Exciting, an ekphrastic by Brenda Hillman in Seasonal Work with Words on Fire, Seasonal Letters with Works on Fire, anyway, something like that. A poem after John Clare, which is mainly a poem of bird songs, and Erasures by Mary Ruffel. Excellent examples, but that does not mean that it's time for one and all to write poems using those models, or that it is the moment for a particular set of procedures to be applied everywhere across the board. I hope the hell not, anyway. And my position is that though it is solidarity, yes, I'm absolutely an advocate of solidarity, but I'm also begging for a little autonomy for writers, and feel that no allegiance is necessary, no allegiance is due. I would add that no particular lineage or tradition or identity is going to faultlessly guide our practice, or that a hotly ironed-on badge of concept or theory is going to dress our wounds. A decade prior, I was seeing a lot of sampling, which led to appropriation, which led to finally the entire text being appropriated, and then a ironed-on badge of a totally ironized title to defend it. And I guess I would fall back on Our Lady of the Peacocks from Milledgeville, who said, you can do whatever you can get away with, but no one's ever gotten away with very much. So one thing that we know is that any art practice is not organic, that's a false proposition. It is made of artifice. But maybe a work comes to feel, as we read or feel our way through it, inevitable in its conception, its construction, its final composition, or what I like to call its compositional whole. Two examples that I have held myself to the bar with in recent years. One is, Anne is not expecting this, is Marriage, a Sentence by Anne Waldman. And another is Evan Lavender Smith's from Old Notebooks. Evan Lavender Smith, by the way, is not a poet, but a fiction writer. But since the fiction industry has not recognized that yet, I'll take him in under our tent. And I will talk a little bit about those if there's time, about why I think those are really great models, and why I guess it brings back form as an extension of content. That I still hear you, Bob, that they are inseparable. The parties to poetry seem to be as factionalized as our obviously dysfunctional political framework. And I wonder if what is being left at the scene or thrown out the window or driven over and then backed over again aren't the many options we actually have in order to find a new way of moving under our dress. So I have a little go-along that I just picked up yesterday when I had a little unscheduled time, that wonderful thing. And I only wanted to go places on foot, and I only wanted to stay downtown. So I walked to the new museum. As soon as I got there, I realized I didn't really want to see the show. I don't really like monsters, and it was going to be a monster show, and I just didn't want to see it. But they have, by virtue of its design, the bookstore, which of course is not an all-on bookstore since it's an art museum, but the titles are all face out. So I spent an hour or so grazing all of these wonderful titles. And at first I was incredibly excited by titles that I hadn't seen yet and the range of the titles. And by the end of my hour, I was quite depressed at the sort of the cumulative apocalyptic feel of the titles. But I kept returning to three. One was an apocalypse in perhaps the most considered retrospective that could have been written so soon after the Holocaust, and that was Adorno's Minima Moralia. The other was Schubert's Winter Journal by Ian Bostridge, a beautifully produced rapture on the old master's art songs about which I know nothing and so have no sense of smell, but felt this was a needed book, an unrestrained encomium no one was clamoring for. And then there was Agnes Martin, Her Life and Art, whose paintings, she has told us, were for people to see before daily care strikes. So if I could pull try to frame those three directions of those titles, I would say that we need to be reminded of how vile we are, that we each and every one are implicated, enter Adorno, and we need room to praise without demand or censure, enter Bostridge, and we need to be prepared, to have ourselves prepared by a perfect stillness, enter Martin. So that's kind of what I had to say about kind of that we have so many tools at our disposal. We need to be able to develop our own toolkit without too much noise around us. And we need to be able to find great text to guide us and space in which to follow and find our own path. I did want to come back to mentioning these two titles, Marriage, a Sentence by Anne, and Evan Lavender Smith's From Old Notebooks, because I thought they were such beautiful examples of form as an extension of content, of what I think a kind of virtuosity has to attain to, maybe not to defend its existence, but to give us something really special, to give us extra. We need extra now. So Anne's book, which I haven't read for a few years now, and she wrote some years before that, before I read it, it takes an actual marriage or the actual institution of marriage, and this title, A Sentence, which of course we know it can be marriage, and carries that logical or illogical premise to not so much a teleological conclusion, but to in a real exploration in a single sentence of all the convolutions and modifications and turbulence of an open-ended circumstance of an institution that we have obviously created for ourselves. I mean, it's just an amazing book. And another, From Old Notebooks, Evan Lavender Smith's, these are actually from old notebooks. These are notebook entries, and they include his domestic life, very domestic, young father, young husband, kids, 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 work, 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 kids, 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 kids. You know, it's like that whole life. And then a very, very active mental life, very informed by a lot of philosophy, a lot of deep reading, and the language going all the way from near porn to, I don't know, to French theory in pretty broad sampling of French theory. But it's not just that it's what it is, it's the organization, it's the patterning of something that really has a great scope, but is taken from raw material. And I thought, no one told them how to write these books, you know. No one was saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do, you know, poetry cops were on the beat when they wrote these books. And that I think we still need great models. And it's not necessarily in great poets, it's in great poetry. They're out there, but they're not necessarily in the camp you find even a safe haven, you know? Yeah. Some are, and you need a safe haven, however you can, you know, construct that. So there is a tremendous amount of poetry. It would be, Anne hit on many of the things that are going on in poetry today. I mean, it is just a surfeit almost of things going on. But I think people really need time and space in which to listen and to find their own way, and they need to find their own models. Simple.
Yeah, really.